So, hi, I'm trying Screencastify as another way to teach online. I'm going to throw this slideshow that you should see on the screen there onto the Google Classroom anyways, but here's a video version in case you want me to read you the slides and enter in clever banter, then you can watch this instead. Um, So let's see how this works. I am totally just kind of messing around here too. This is kind of a beta testing experience. It's great. Okay, hey, there's a video on the Mongols. I put that on the class website. Here it is with a GIF. Nowadays they're calling it GIF. That should help all of you guys who feel emotions about words. Click on the link, watch the video. It's John Green talking about the Mongols and their impact most broadly in the world. So that's a video you can watch later. Click NWO, New World Order. So essentially, this map shows the extent of Mongol conquest. They got into all the way up to the empire, the Holy Roman Empire up here, and of course extended into China. Okay, so let's move on. Political impact, just going through this, the end of the Jin dynasty. Now, this is something I didn't really go into in great depth, so here's a great benefit of listening to me talk about things I might have forgotten. There's, at the time of the the rise of the Mongols, so we have around 12, but the 1230s, 1215, I think is when Genghis Khan becomes, when Temujin becomes Genghis Khan. Anyways, up to the 1230s, you have two empires or two Chinas. There's the Jin in the north and the Sung in the south. Now the Song, sorry, wow, typos. Anyways, that was a very powerful, wealthy nation, and we looked at the Song in terms of their existence during the Silk Road trade, and that lesson a few weeks ago. Now the Jin are interesting because they are composed of essentially a nomadic group of people called the Jurchen. The Jurchen, much like the Mongols after them, were nomads. They swept into northern China, conquered it, and created their own dynasty. This later has a similar repeat event with the Mongols conquering both the Jurchen Jin dynasty and the Song dynasty, creating the advent of the Yuan dynasty. Again, like the Jin, Yuan was very short-lived. Now, they didn't conquer India. Their successors, very distant successors, really. The Mongols conquered India. In 1526, you have this guy named Babur the Great enter into India. In fact, he was kind of he gained power and renown among the Turkic Afghan groups in what would now be kind of modern day Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan region, the stands. Anyways, but he was kicked out by other Turkic groups, and so he basically turned his power to India, which was divided at that time among many different rulers. The Mughals came in, and also he capitalized on the use of big cannons in battles in 1526. So, that's Babur. Russia, there's the end of the sovereign rule there. Russia, interestingly enough, was not a united force. It was a series of principalities, and each of these principalities was vying with each other, so right for the picking. We'll talk about that momentarily. Iran, the Khwarizmid, that is pronounced correctly, they were conquered. And then, of course, you have the fall of the Abbasids. They had already been in rapid decline, but you have the fall and destruction of Baghdad in 1258 under, I believe it's Ugaday, Genghis's son. Zubadai, one of Genghis's generals, was sent on an investigation mission. It wasn't even a significant portion of Genghis Khan's army, but he was sent to just investigate what was to the west, and then he got all the way into Hungary. So he he revealed both that Europe was very divided, ripe for the picking, and unprepared for the Mongol arrival. Some would say onslaught, not me. Okay, here's a map showing a breakdown of the Mongol Empire and its successor kingdoms. I'm going to give you a reading on the Golden Horde, which is kind of up. Oh, I can use the cursor. Cool. That clicked the button instead of drawing a picture. Anyways, there's the Khanate of the Golden Horde and the Great Khanate. I'm just going to exit the screen here and see if I can do something cool with this. That way you can see me talk at you. I'm not sure if that's a better thing. Can I draw now? Yeah. Oh, look at that circle. See that? There's the Golden Horde. This is an imperfect tool for doing this. Let's get rid of that. Let's, hello, sidebar. Can you? No, you can't go away. Will you please go away? We're on an adventure learning how to use this together. How fun. Okay, next slide. Nope. There we are, explaining success. So essentially, now you can see my hands move and me stutter as I think. Okay, so basically, I already talked about the division of China into North and South, and that's when historians try to understand why the Mongols were successful. One of the things they look to is the fact that they conquered a divided country. Again, the Abbasids as well falling apart at around this time. The Mongol army was incredibly well organized into units of basically tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. And the idea was essentially the commander of the 10, the 100, and so on would have, similar to a legion, power of life and death over their soldiers, and they were very brutally organized. The punishment for desertion was the death penalty for the deserters. It was a merit-based system. Prior to this, if you were fighting as a Mongol, you would essentially. I just noticed something else. Sitting and teaching is a weird thing too. Even talking, I find it odd. Anyways, side notes. And the other thing is at this time, and this was alluded to in the video that I gave you guys last week, but essentially Mongol society prior to Genghis Khan was organized along familial lines, and there were some families that were more superior to others, nobility for all intents and purposes. With Genghis, he turned to a more merit-based system, and that's what that tension between Genghis and insert other guy's name here. Shibadai? Sure. That's what the tension was between he and his old friend. Anyways, so Genghis introduces a merit-based system. This merit-based system allows people who have skill and ability to rise up to that systems of tens. So that's really important as well. And of course, they established a very terrifying reputation, which is kind of what I was hinting at when I was talking about the historical arsonists discussion point. I'll get back to that in later, if I remember. Okay, trade. So essentially, under the Silk, during the time when the Silk route was operating, there were a series of different intermediaries that you would have to pass through, different kingdoms and so on. In some cases, at some points through history, you would be required to pay taxes. Think of Europe before the glorious European Union. Anyways, you'd pay taxes, and as you pass the borders between the different kingdoms. With the advent of the Mongol Empire, those taxes disappear. It's just one long, large entity. In addition, so that kind of actually causes trade to expand. In addition, merchants were encouraged to use Mongol infrastructure. It says there 10%. So basically, the Mongols offered 10% above asking price for goods from merchants. if they used their road infrastructure. So kind of, reinforcing the stability of their system that they were establishing. And most of the road networks that they were using were existing road networks. They also used something similar to what the Persians used through the Persian Empire and their Great Road System, where you had checkpoints. In this case, there were supposed to be 10,000 relay stations, according to Marco Polo. And those relay stations would be positioned basically at the extent of a horse's, how far a horse could travel. I don't know how far that is in real life. I only know in D&D they go like 30 kilometers, but that's not useful at all for this. So anyways, you travel, your horse would be exhausted, you go to one of these way stations, and then you would exchange for another horse and continue on your way. So this system was conducive to increased trade, along with the fact that all the trade networks were essentially unified under one entity. So that's really important. I kind of already mentioned this, the whole fall of the Jin dynasty. After that, you get the Mongols kind of advancing to the south, to the Song, under Ogadai, and then more importantly, Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. You get the fall of the Song dynasty and the Song Empire. So what does this result in? Essentially, it results in the advent of another new dynasty, a very short-lived dynasty, and a very kind of outsider dynasty, the Yuan. There are some historians within China at the time and subsequently who actually looked at this as a good thing that the Mongols came. Not the whole bloodshed and the murdering and all that. That everybody knows that's wrong. But China was never supposed to be two kingdoms. It was supposed to be a united empire. And the whole thing that maintained that united empire was this concept of the mandate of heaven. Back when we were talking about the establishment of Confucian ideals and the establishment of China under Emperor Zhang, because I can't say his other name, we had the establishment of this belief that because the ruler has united the empire and has maintained a system of order from the top down, there's no civil war going on, that person has gained what's called the mandate of heaven. And at the time, there were some in China when the Mongols arrived and unified, brought the Jin and Song dynasties into one Yuan dynasty. They believed that the mandate had returned. So there's that. That's kind of a strange discussion that's kind of going on at the time, and subsequently by later historians who look at this and think maybe it wasn't awful. The Yuan adapted many Chinese traditions. They moved the capital from Karakoram, the capital that Genghis had established, back to Beijing. They rebuilt Beijing because, of course, they leveled it. You saw that in the video. Hopefully, you watched that. In terms of the Yuan, they were different than the Chinese. So they were resented by many, even though there's that minority that said, the mandate's back. That's probably what they do. Like I'm sure that's culturally universal. Anyways, the Mongols still held on to their beliefs, their traditions. So they accommodated the Chinese as much as they could. They were tolerant of cultural traditions, of religion, of the art, everything. They did import their own administrators. Many of them were actually taken from the Persian Empire. This is, again, if we think back to how you deal with conquering an empire, this is something the Assyrians did, the Persians did, where you take like conquered people from this side of the empire and move them to this side to keep them kind of uneasy, off edge, and organized, or easily organized for you as a conqueror. So many Persian administrators were actually brought into China to manage China. Again, this caused resentment because by the Song dynasty, the tradition of bureaucracy and the idea of these mandarins who have been training to be administrators since childhood, and going through incredibly complicated test systems and series of trials to become administrators. Well, all those guys just kind of out of a job and disappear, and that system disappears or is ignored. But it comes back, obviously, under the successors to the Mongols. So you have the Mongol rule is very brief. It lasts 1368. Based on math, that's about 100 years. And then you have the return of the Ming Dynasty under local rebels who bring back a lot of the cultures, old cultural traditions, and that bureaucracy system that I was talking about. Okay. Another thing about another, I guess, case study in Mongol conquest is the Golden Horde. So this is a group of Mongols and Turkic nomads that sweep into Kievan Russia. Kievan Rus were the people at the time. Russia wasn't really a thing. It was more like the Duchy of Muscovy. But they sweep into what is now modern day Russia about 1237, 1240. The people who come are not just Mongols, they're Mongols mixed with Turkic nomads who the Mongols kind of enlist on the way. So it's kind of this, while they fight in a similar style, they're like a coalition group almost. It's named after the Kipchaks, who were this Turkic group that lived north of the Caspian Sea. And so they have the Kipchak Khanate. But Golden Horde is a really cool name, so that's what we have with them. It's the European term for them because they took so much gold. Anyways, so Russia was not densely populated at the time. So Mongol conquest in Russia is very different than, say, Mongol conquest in China. In China, they sweep in, they capture cities, they settle. In Russia, they sweep in, they raid cities, but the cities are little, they're small, with the exception of like Novgorod and Kiev, a few others. Most of the cities are small, so they're raided. And the Golden Horde Mongols never settle in Russian cities. They establish a small city along the Volga, but they essentially stick to their traditional nomadic ways. They extract gold and taxes from the Russians, and they extract slaves from various raiding missions. But essentially, they don't settle in the same way. As a result of that, they don't absorb the Russian culture in the same way as, say, the Yuan did in China. So it's very different style of relationship, and then different results, of course. So there's a reading that I'm going to give you about the later stages of the Golden Horde, and a guy named Grand Prince Dmitry who challenges them and fights a battle with them. And it kind of gets at how like the Russians still kind of maintain a little bit of their identity, but adopt some of the Turkic style of combat. Okay. Oh, hey, look at this. Readings already. Isn't that exciting? So there's 3 readings. There's first going to be the Chronicle of Novgorod. So you can see the questions there. You can read them yourselves. You don't need me to read through the questions. It's a really good primary source from a person who's witnessing the Mongol onslaught. So it's fast. It's discomforting, perhaps, if you really read closely, because there's a lot of death. Sorry. Kublai Khan and Kamikaze. This tells the famous story of Kublai Khan's attempt to subjugate Japan and the arrival of the divine winds twice. It happened twice. So that's a good reading. And then, as I was mentioning, the Define the Golden Horde is another good reading. So these are going to be on the class website. I'm not doing a video this week. Instead, you get this glorious piece of work. Look at this. See, there's a circle too. Okay. So on the comments, Genghis Khan is seen by some popular historians as a historical arsonist. So like this is most famously made by a guy named Dan Carlin, who has a famous podcast called Hardcore History. It's very entertaining. but he is a hyperbolic person and jumps to say very verbose, um, you know, maybe clearly judgmental things. I don't know. So the concept of historical arsonist, I raised that question to hopefully get you guys to recoil against it, rebel against it. It's insultingly reductive. Um, to say he's a historical arsonist and he clears away the waste and the chaff of civilizations beforehand is to both disregard the achievements of those civilizations. Also a bit anachronistic because if you're wiping out the things that represent those civilizations, like the writing and the art, because you're destroying it, then how do we know if they were actually decadent or fallow? So it's a bit of a insulting reduction, but I think it's something we should talk about because it gets us looking at the practice of writing history. The whole idea is to tell a story, and in some cases, some historians want to simplify things to kind of pull you in, and then later say, well, actually, this is really insulting to say historical arsonist, which is what I was trying to do. Hopefully it works. Um, anyway, so that's my little comment on that. I hope that this test worked. If it didn't, I've just been talking to my computer while my children try to sleep for no reason. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Okay, next week we will learn about, I believe we're going back to Europe to learn about the Middle Ages. And at some point, I think we're going to be talking about the flag, slightly topical. And then after that, the High Middle Ages, 100 Years War, things are going to be exciting and informative. Okay, I don't know how to close one of these off, so bye.